With over 100 kilometers before they reach the Azores, the pilots face a long and difficult maneuver. They need to keep the plane gliding for more than 50 minutes to reach the Azores.
There's very little time for any emotions at all. You're just so focused on the mission at hand. It's a life or death situation, of course, but your intention is to get it there. You're not thinking about the alternatives, but you're fully focused on getting the airplane to its destination.
Transat 236 Heavy to Lajes Tower.
Lajes Tower receiving, Transat 236 Heavy.
Do you have us on radar, Transat 236?
We have you on primary radar. Confirm you're at 80 miles out. Your heading is good.
Transat 236 Heavy Lajes Tower, we are trying to make the runway. Please describe runway, heading, and length.
Lajes Tower, Transat 236 Heavy. Runway is 33 and 10,865 feet long. Airport dead ahead on your present heading. Please advise when you have it in sight.
Transat 236 Heavy, we cannot see the airport. We will tell you when we can.
As the minutes tick by, the long wait for those on board is agonizing.
That's it. This is it. It's over. They're just gonna die in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
I had contemplated the idea that we would die, certainly. And kind of I think in that moment you can accept it more than you think you would accept it.
I never thought I was gonna die. I was in a little bit of a state of distress. I did my best not to show it, to try to keep the cool, calm, and collected, but there was certain times where I wasn't sure if we would make it.
The torture of the whole fact that you're gonna die, which I totally thought I was going to, is worse to me than dying. If I'm gonna die, just kill me now. Just get a gun and shoot me, or just let this plane go down and nosedive into the ocean and then just die instantly.
On the ground, emergency services prepare for the crash landing of a fully loaded airliner. With 20 kilometers to go, the crew now prepare for the most dangerous part of the operation, getting their plane on the runway in one piece.
6 Heavy to Lajes Tower, do you have our distance from threshold now, and weather, please?
Roger, Transat 236 Heavy. You are 8 miles out according to primary radar. Airspeed 280 knots according to our readings. Visibility unlimited. You should have the airport in sight.
Negative, Lajes Tower. Until now, we cannot see the runway.
There is no room for error. Without power, the pilots have only one chance at landing. If they miss or overshoot the runway, the results could be catastrophic.
I got it. Just to the right. Minimum rad speed is 140 knots. Maximum speed for gravity gear extension, 200 knots.
I'm not lowering the gear until the last minute, okay?
Okay.
The crew struggle to lose height and speed for landing.
Roger, Lajes. 6 nautical miles.
Let's open the slats. It'll slow us down a bit.
Slats out and locked.
As they approach the runway, their speed increases dangerously. Too fast and they could roll off the end of the runway.
Lower the gear.
Hold on. Speed is about 200. All right. I stabilize the speed. Can you give me a landing speed, please?
No engine, no flaps. Ideal approach speed is 170 knots. We're too fast.
Yes. But the runway is very long.
Captain Piché now performs a difficult series of swerving maneuvers to slow the plane down for landing.
The plane was almost on a 45-degree angle. I thought it was just gonna flip over and just nosedive straight down.
The plane was circling around the island to slow down. So then we saw land and then we saw water. And when I saw water again, it really struck me that, you know, our chance for survival had maybe was gone.
The runway is long. Yeah, sure, but at the end is a 400-foot cliff. If we don't stop in enough time, we're toast. We're dead.
The crew line up the giant Airbus for final approach.
Landing gear down and locked. 3 green. No flaps. Only the emergency brakes. No spoilers, no reverse thrust. 4,000 feet, 195 knots. "3,000 feet, 197 knots. 2,000 feet, 200 knots.
Alert the cabin.
Cabin crew, 1 minute to landing.
Hang on. Let's go.
Vertical speed at 3,000 feet per minute. We're going way too fast. And the speed's increasing, 203 knots now. It's way too fast. 1,000 feet, 201 knots.
I'll try to get the nose up. We'll ride fast.
But even if the crew can get the Airbus on the runway, they face a further problem. Without engines, the normal procedures for braking are severely restricted. For Flight 236, the danger is far from over. The pilots must land the plane without power and somehow get it to stop.
Everybody, I need you to brace. Hang on.
The Airbus hits hard at high speed.
The tires have blown.
Captain Piché tries to hold the nose down. After bursting 8 tires, the plane finally stops in the middle of the runway.
What we say? We made it! We made it! We made it! Yeah, we made it! Come on, everybody, get out of the plane right now! Let's get it! Let's go! Come on!
Told you we'd make it.
I just wanted to get out of this airplane quickly. I jumped, I hit the ground hard. I don't think my rear end actually even touched the chute at all.
I didn't slide down the slide. I ran down it. And they're just, get out, get out, get out. So you're just running out of this aircraft.
What in God's name just happened? I fell down to the ground, literally, and I started crying.
I mean, once you're off the plane and you're evacuated, you want to know what happened.
Piché and de Jager had flown their Airbus without power further than any passenger jets in history. As news of their remarkable achievements spread around the world, they found themselves reluctant heroes.
You don't have time really to think about anything else than taking care of the safety of your passenger, you know. That's your main goal, and since we didn't have any engine, The other main goal was to make the landing safely. So at that time, I guess the experience came in, you know, with the help of my colleague. That's why we made a successful landing.
You train for the worst, but you never know how you'll deal with situations like this. And reflecting afterwards, I feel we dealt in the most professional and complete manner we could.
A feeling of being grateful to see all the passengers were okay.
You know, something like this happened, you never know what is going to happen, really. I mean, you start not to believe it. I mean, it makes no sense that a big jet with 2 engines has no more power with 300 people on board, you know.
But although the public story was a success, disturbing questions remained. Why had a highly sophisticated airliner run out of fuel? What exactly had happened to Flight 236? Away from the cameras, an accident investigation began immediately by the Portuguese, Canadian, and French transport authorities. Initial checks quickly confirmed that all the fuel tanks of the Airbus were indeed empty. But to lose more than 17 tons of fuel in such a short space of time meant they'd had a major leak. The question was, where? Engineers examined the fuel system, searching for faults in the tanks and the fuel lines. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for, just by the right engine.
In this particular case, you had a hydraulic tube that's relatively small by comparison to the larger fuel tube. And the hydraulic tube, due possibly to pulsations in the hydraulic system, were abrading against the larger tube. And eventually the larger tube had a leak in it, and the leak, or not the leak itself, but the hole eventually possibly led into a fracture of the tube, allowing this massive fuel flow outside of the engine.
The investigators began checking Air Transat maintenance records. They discovered that on the 17th of August, 5 days before the flight, Air Transat had removed the right-hand engine for maintenance and installed a replacement unit sent by Rolls-Royce. But as they analyzed the repair logs for the engine, they uncovered a shocking mistake. This was not a case of faulty design, but of faulty maintenance. Rolls-Royce had supplied the engine without a hydraulic pump assembly. To overcome this, Transat mechanics had used the parts from an older engine. But they didn't fit properly, and the pipes had been rubbing together for 5 days, until, midway over the Atlantic, one finally broke.
The engine was delivered minus these 2 tubes and a bracket. That the purpose of that bracket was to maintain adequate clearance. So if they took the bracket off the old engine and put it on the new engine, is that the pipes would be locked together so that they could possibly abrade. So the mechanics, now I can't fault them, but they were not given specific instructions to verify the 3mm clearance.
As investigators questioned Air Transat mechanics, they found more disturbing evidence of malpractice. The chief mechanic testified that he had been concerned about the substitution of another hydraulic assembly. 5 days before the accident, he raised his concerns with his superior. He was told that it would cost too much to have the aircraft waiting for the missing parts and to go ahead with the substitution. The replacement parts only differed from the correct ones by a few millimeters, but it was a difference that almost cost 306 lives. A few days after the accident, Air Transat publicly accepted responsibility for the faulty maintenance.
We have to realize that there was a small mistake made in terms of changing the pump. We installed it, but then some pipes, so to speak, were needed to be connected to the pump, and there was a mismatch.
The immediate consequences for Air Transat in that event was that they got to pay a fine of $250,000, which was the highest ever in Canada, for an error that could have been prevented.
how someone that is supposed to be qualified in their job can put the wrong part onto an engine and risk 300 people's lives is beyond me.
This incident is a very strong reminder that regulation is important and safety is important, and lives will be lost in the absence of that. And they're real lives. It's not just, this imaginary figure in your head of 300 people. It's real people who suffer and continue to suffer as a result. If it hadn't been us suffering, it would have been our families.
This was by no means the end of the story. Investigators now turn their attention to the cockpit itself. What role had the crew played in the events of August the 24th? Could they have done more to avert the crisis? Key questions remained unanswered. Questions about what happened on the flight deck. The investigation into Air Transat Flight 236 discovered that basic maintenance errors had led to the fuel leak. Air Transat accepted responsibility and were heavily fined. But the focus now turned on the flight deck and the performance of the crew. What part did they play in the fuel loss?
Wing crossfeed. On.
On.
When the crew opened the crossfeed valve to transfer fuel from the left wing tank to the right, they lost 17 tons of fuel in less than 30 minutes. Yet they failed to close the crossfeed valve and prevent further loss.
Mayday, mayday. We have lost both engines due to fuel starvation. We are gliding now.
In the days after the incident, Captain Robert Piché and Dirk de Jager were called before the inquiry and asked in detail about their actions. More than 2 years later, these findings have still not been published. What follows are possible explanations for the course of events that night, based on known facts and expert opinion.
Oil temp low and oil pressure high on number 2.
The warnings of high oil pressure and low oil temperature from the engine on the right wing would not have led the pilots to suspect that there was already a major fuel leak.
The indications that were being presented with respect to the oil system would probably not give the crew any indications. They may have questioned what was causing the erroneous or strange indications, but there's nothing certainly in my mind or their training, I think, that would have triggered them to suspect that a fuel system might be involved.
Bet you it's a computer problem.
But although the pilots thought they had a computer error, the oil warnings were actually correct and were the first indication of a much more serious problem.
Fuel imbalance warning. Haven't seen that before.
When the fuel imbalance warning came up 20 minutes later, showing less fuel in the right wing than the left, it seemed unconnected with the oil alarms. This could have reinforced Captain Piché's idea that he was facing a series of computer errors.
Do not apply this procedure if a fuel leak is suspected.
Despite his doubts, Captain Piché was obliged to follow Airbus procedure to correct the imbalance. He opened the crossfeed valve.
Wing crossfeed. On.
But was following the checklist enough?
You just can't idly flip switches in response to commands from the computers and anticipate that all will be well at the end of it. Once the checklist is complete, we can sit there fat, dumb, and happy. That's not the case at all. You got to keep second guessing it. Is that right? Did we do the right checklist? Have we got the results that we need?
Once the pilots calculated the high rate of fuel loss, they should have suspected a major leak.
Transat 236 Heavy declaring fuel emergency.
By the time they had confirmed the leak, their options were severely limited.
They were flying blind, as it were. There was no checklist information provided to them. They assumed that once they had engaged in this procedure that the situation would resolve itself, and it wasn't. Now they had a choice. Do I close the crossfeed and see what happens, or do I leave the cross feed open as the fuel and balance checklist has dictated, and maybe the situation will correct itself? The crew wasn't really sure. It wasn't an eventuality. It wasn't a situation that they had been trained for, I'm sure. They were in new ground with really no guidance to help them. If they left the cross feed open, or whether they closed the cross feed, I would only be speculating as to what changes it might have resulted in the outcome in this event.
Captain Piché believed for a long time that he was facing a computer error. It was only when the engines finally stopped that he had to accept the fuel leak was genuine. The technological complexity of modern aircraft can help to make them safer and more reliable, but it can also lead to the problems that nearly brought catastrophe to Air Transat 236. Discrepancies in replacement parts led to a fuel leak. Distrust of computers led the crew to misread the situation. These errors combined to have huge implications. Only because air traffic control initially sent the plane 60 miles south to avoid congestion was Flight 236 close enough to the Azores when the crisis struck. Otherwise, it would have had to ditch in the ocean. The investigation remains unpublished. Airbus blamed the pilots for mishandling the fuel leak. Robert Piché and Dirk de Jager continued to fly with Air Transat. In August 2002, they received the highest honors of the Airline Pilots Association for the longest glide ever accomplished in a passenger airline. After the accident, Airbus modified its checklist in the event of fuel imbalance. From now on, the computer checks all the fuel levels on board against the flight plan. It now gives a clear warning if more fuel is being lost than the engines can consume. Rolls-Royce has reissued a service bulletin, alerting all its clients of the incompatibility of two almost similar parts. For the passengers trapped on Flight 236, the trauma has left them with mixed feelings.
All right, I stabilized the speed.
This accident wasn't caused by simply one omission by any one individual, as is typical of most aircraft accidents. There's a whole chain of events, a whole series of events that lead to the incident or to the accident, and this accident was no different.
Whatever the circumstances are, the pressure that he was under is tremendous. He got that plane down safely, only blew out 8 of the 12 tires, and saved 300 people. He saved 300 people's lives.
Captain Piché saved our lives, and whether or not he made an error, or if there was a failure of a computer, it doesn't really matter because we're alive.
Do I think he's a hero? No. Do I think he's a hell of a pilot? Yes.
Thank God the islands of the Azores were there and basically saved our lives. But if that fuel pump broke 5 minutes beforehand, we would have ended up into the water, and I probably wouldn't be here to tell the story.